Recently, I was super lucky to speak with a reporter at Berlingske and talked a bit about what it's like living in Copenhagen for internationals. And I thought it'd be fun today to talk with Mike about what I shared there and get his opinion, whether he agrees with me or not on the things that I discussed. So one of the first things that I talked about in the piece was, or that got reported on about me, is that I'm not so good at Danish and that I'm a little bit embarrassed by it. I actually thought this was just part of the conversation that I have with the reporter, but she definitely read me and put this in the actual article itself. Are you embarrassed by me that I don't speak better Danish?
No, because I speak Danish just as well as you do. It's a fair point. I think it's something, honestly, that's one of the trepidations I think that a lot of us internationals have, is that journey of learning Danish, because one, it's hard for a whole number of reasons that we've discussed many, many times. But I think the key is to realize that it is tough for us to speak in Danish, mostly because it is a little bit embarrassing until you get good at it, like any language that you're learning, for sure.
I'm definitely self-conscious about it, and I definitely feel like I can speak more than I do, but I'm always I don't like being laughed at. I feel very vulnerable when I'm speaking a language that isn't my mother tongue, and I felt weird speaking it to her, and also she was very comfortable doing the interview in English and then transcribing it. She was super helpful to also send it to me in both languages before it was sent to print. So I was able to kind of review it and make sure that it was on par with what I said.
That's one of the nice things about living in Denmark, in Copenhagen especially, is that willingness to operate in English. Like it's, I get it. Nearly everyone here speaks English because it makes sense. But additionally, it is a nice courtesy for us to be able to operate in our mother tongue as well.
The flip side of that, though, just like with this interview, is it makes it a little bit harder to get proficient at Danish when you're not really allowed to speak it until you're perfect.
Yeah.
So that can make it tough, too. Another thing that I discussed was basically that I do love living in Copenhagen. The whole purpose of the article came to be. It was spawned by a couple that I think was from Portland. They moved to Copenhagen and didn't even make it a year before they decided it was too boring and they decided to move back. Now, I saw the write-up that they had in the paper and people were not having it. People were people were kind of brutal to them, very defensive about it in the comments that were online. I understand because we deal with that not just on our channel, but on social media and other things as well. I hope that they were okay because they may not be as used to it as we are. But yeah, they basically called it boring. I said, we come from Philadelphia. It's a little over twice the size of Copenhagen in population, but I still find that I have everything I need here, and that was something I kept saying. I feel like the city offers a lot, even if it is smaller than where I come from. I don't feel bored here, but it does take a little more effort to find your place and find the things you want to do. But that's every city. That's what I said. That's everywhere.
The beauty of Copenhagen is it's an international capital, so it has everything that you would have in a major city like that. It's small enough that's accessible for that. Also, I think a year is not a long time, honestly, with the interest of not being, say, a tourist or an expat that's just coming in to sample some things, but to really see what the city has to offer, what the culture has to offer, takes some time. And I think as an international, it also there's a little bit less, I think, for us than, say, Danes that are from here because of the language, because of the fact that it's not our native culture. But for me, the vibrancy of it is because it is an international city. You get that wonderful culture, which is everybody who's living here, and not just the Danes, especially in Copenhagen, all the other internationals. That's kind of your first window typically into culture here in Copenhagen.
Right. Well, it's not the capital of Portland, it's the capital of Denmark. You know what I'm saying? I think my exact words to her and that she printed was it doesn't sound like they did it right. And I don't mean by that they did something drastically wrong, but one, I think you said a year is not long enough. If you're not here for every month of the year, I think everybody that lives here and is watching this probably knows from month to month, literally from week to week, it's a very different environment, whether it's the climate that influences that, the daylight, or just the things that are going on. It's very different from one week to the next week. And even year to year, it may feel like a different city depending on a lot of factors like the weather or what's going on.
I think it also depends on what your approach is when you arrive. From our experience, when we first moved to Copenhagen, we only thought we were going to be here for 6 months. So honestly, we spent as much time going to the airport and traveling because it was almost more like we were living in Europe as opposed to living in Copenhagen.
Right.
And it's as we decided to stay longer that we really started to get into and do things in Copenhagen, expand our social circle beyond just maybe superficial or small groups of friends or whatever else. So I think It depends on what your approach is and what you're interested in. Did they move from Portland to Europe, or did they move from Portland to Copenhagen?
Right.
It's two completely different things.
Yeah, you're not studying abroad. Like, you're living here. So if you don't treat it like you're living here, then, and you treat it more like you're doing a semester abroad, then yeah, I can see why you would feel bored to move home or whatever their problem was. Now, and it could be something more than that. I don't want to, I don't want to diminish their experience. If it was so bad that they had to move home, then maybe there was more going on. That was kind of my feeling on it. I also talked a little bit, one thing that came up and often comes up when I have these conversations is what Danes can do better and what it's like breaking into Danish social circles. It seems like the reporter, Stina, that I had spoken to, and a lot of people that discuss this topic, whether it's from the Danish perspective or the international perspective, talk about how hard it is to break into Danish social circles. And I validated that. I think it's absolutely true. But I said that a lot of it is things that you would find everywhere. I wasn't walking around Philadelphia looking for people with accents and befriending them. Like, nobody owes you anything, and I think that's often the attitude. But sometimes you'd like to hear that in a little more gentle way.
Sure. I think it's also the way that you connect with people is different, I'd say, in Denmark than it is in the U.S. One of the big ones is, say, work culture, where I think in U.S. it's more, you'd be more inclined to have your coworkers invite you over for a barbecue or something else like that. Where that's less the case, I think here. Obviously, language can be a bit of a barrier because even Danes that are doing various activities, typically they're going to be in Danish language. So that's going to be something that's a little bit of a barrier, even if it's not intentional in that way. It's just this is the country that we live in. And so I think it's needing to realize that anywhere you move, you need to go find things that are going to find other people that are either also in your same situation, which means typically other international events or international organizations that you're going to have here, or you have to put yourself out there into whatever group that you want to do. And it may mean that you're taking a leap of faith into an organization that you don't know anything about, or an activity you don't know anything about, just because you want to make friends.
Another thing that I noted on that aspect of making friends is Stina brought up a bit of the things you often hear about, like American friendships versus Danish friendships. Specifically, she said like the stereotype that American friendships are more superficial. I hear that a lot. And then I sort of explained like why I don't necessarily think that's true. Just like I don't think it's true that like all Danes are closed off and don't want to befriend people. I think it's just friendships are approached differently. I think Americans and some other cultures are a bit more comfortable with a quick friendship and seeing where it goes and sort of taking a chance on somebody and don't mind putting themselves out there. But one reason that I sort of explained it, this is just my hypothesis, is my personal thought. I was a teacher in the United States before I moved here. So not only did I go through schooling there, but I saw it every day in my professional life. And students in the US are very used to mixing with other students. We may see 100 other students throughout the day, whereas Danes are very used to having sort of a group of kids that they move all the way through school with, where you're used to making new friends your entire life. You like literally from a 1 hour class period to the next 1 hour class period, you may have to turn to somebody you don't know very well and work on a problem together and then present it to the class. So there's all kinds of things like that where I think we're around more people throughout our entire lives and we're comfortable making those quick connections and sort of befriending somebody in a short period of time.
Agreed. And I think it's also that different cultures have different comfort with, say, the informality of friendship. It's also sometimes pushing a little bit of your culture, our culture, which is a little bit more kind of opening up immediately, opening up the doors to our home to anybody immediately. That's honestly a good thing. And a lot of people that we become friends with, we met on a Friday night, had them over on Saturday, and we're suddenly friends that way. Like we kind of push the friendship in that way.
But that can really be a turnoff to some Danes and Scandinavians because they don't do it that way.
But then again, it can be a turnoff to some folks back in the U.S. too that are like, we just met, I'm not coming over to your house.
And I think no matter what, you will find that you're probably going to have a few months, maybe even a full year where you don't have those close friendships. It can be really hard living away from your network of friends, and maybe that's what this couple that inspired the story went through. I have no idea. I did also talk about the pros and cons, the things that I think Copenhageners and Danes in general do really well that I really love. And one thing that I said was I just find it, I feel like Danes really nail it when it comes to like living a good life that's simple and authentic, that they don't deprive themselves of anything and just live a very like fulfilled life. And they don't necessarily need like more and more and the next and like the next best thing. They're just very content and can really find beauty in almost a very like stress-free, calm sort of existence, and I really like that. I like it is a slightly slower pace here in Copenhagen than the city that we came from, and I think it's fun. Like a lot of Danes actually will be like, "Oh, Copenhagen's too hectic and busy for me." You know, it's everything's perspective. But I've found that I really like the de-stressed and simple is a bad connotation, but I think that was how I described it. It's just a nice, simple life.
For me, it's a compliment, not a dig by any means. And I don't think simple means
That's
boring
I
necessarily.
meant it that way too.
Yeah, having comfort. It's funny. Like I feel like back in the States, we would never say to somebody like, "Oh, do you want to go for a walk?" Like, whereas you definitely do that here. Where even on a crummy winter day, it's like, "Let's go for a walk around the lakes," or "Let's go for a walk and we grab a coffee." I think there's something about not having to have everything be the best or do it all the way to a 10 that you don't need to do. Like having a wonderful day that is just enjoying the company of each other or the company of solitude. I think that's something that people are very comfortable with here that maybe in the States less so, which is just being comfortable being by yourself and going for a walk yourself or going and getting coffee yourself and just sitting and reading a newspaper or a book in a coffee shop. I think there's a comfort with that kind of just listening to yourself and what you want emotionally and physically. That's, I think, important and something that we've learned being here.
That's what I love, that it's just like, you want a cigarette, you have a cigarette. You want a beer, you have a beer. You don't judge yourself or other people on it. You want some candy on a Friday, you have candy on a Friday. You want cake, have cake, you know, and I really like that part too. The thing that she asked me was how Copenhagen could improve or how Danes could improve things for internationals here. And that was hard because I don't always want to be overly critical. But the thing that I said is internationals don't always know everything that's going on. So maybe that's part of the reason why this couple thought that it was boring. I think a lot of things that are happening around the city almost end up being word of mouth. I feel like as the years went on, I learned more about what was going on, where I could go for things. There's all kinds of things that are sort of not just unwritten rules, but unwritten good things too, that don't always trickle into an English version or to internationals. Also, maybe it's because Danes don't think to tell us, because you just kind of grow up knowing that this is when this happens or we do this on this day. And one thing that, you know, could help is just sort of having that information. I don't know that it needs to be posted online somewhere, you know, and it probably is. It's just, it doesn't always get to the international community super well.
True.
Another thing I said is some of the things that are really great here could kind of be doubled down on. So for example, like Culture Night in Copenhagen is huge. Almost overcrowded and overdone to where like I almost want to go away that weekend because it's so popular, but why not spread it out? Why not do it the first Friday of every month outside of the summer? Or why not do it in the spring or you know, find a way to double down on it and make it nicer? Same thing, like right now, the Copenhagen Light Festival is going on. There's light displays all over the city. Well, it's a dark, cold winter. Everybody knows that. Everybody talks about it. Why is it just for 23 days in February? Like literally you could turn those lights on as soon as the Christmas markets get packed up and keep them on until March. You know, these are just things that I'm like, it's really nice. Why don't we do more of that thing that's really nice?
Yeah, I think more civic activities is always a good thing. I think another thing, and maybe this is an ask, is, you know, and maybe it's a little bit against culture, but it's like, we want to share. I speak for all internationals. We want to share in these things. We want to learn these different things. Don't be afraid to invite your neighbors or your colleagues for something. And I get that something, maybe it's going to be in Danish. Like, that's fine. We can stand there and just smile while we kind of try to understand what's going on. Don't be afraid to invite us to participate in these things. So much of Danish culture is beautiful and fun and interesting. And that's why we live here. We want to be a part of that. So don't feel like you're infringing on us in any way, like to be welcomed into these sorts of activities, even if it's just, you know, something with the kids for Festival in the courtyard of the building. Like, we don't know that's going on when we're first here. Like, invite us over so we can see how you slap the cat out of the barrel. Like, really engage with us. I think that's something that's really cool, because that is what's going to make us internationals want to stay even more, because we feel like we're participating not just in the city, but in the culture in toto.
And on that note of things that you may not know, if you want to learn some things that you may not already know about Copenhagen, we made this video that you can watch right here that explores Copenhagen and talks to you about different things, facts, and places that you may not know about Copenhagen, and you can watch it right here. Thanks for watching this video, everybody.
Hi.